But we begin tonight with the fast eroding political ground beneath the Republican Party's latest anointed rising star. He is Bob McDonnell, the famously and recently elected governor of Virginia. Republicans thought enough of his national prospects and thought enough of his image as a revitalizing force for their party that they invited Governor McDonnell to address the nation in response to President Obama's State of the Union address in February. Mr. McDonnell gave that speech 11 whole days after he was inaugurated, when the Republican Party decided to declare itself back and better than ever in a slickly produced self-congratulatory web ad. Bob McDonnell was the chosen one to deliver the sacred first soundbite in that ad.
Here in Virginia, we live in the birthplace of American freedom and democracy. And this year, we're thrilled that our Commonwealth is the birthplace of a Republican resurgence in America.
Sold and obviously bought as a moderate, Bob McDonnell effectively ran away from his super conservative religious right origins. Yes, his graduate school thesis, which he did as an adult at Pat Robertson's Regent University, did suggest that women having jobs, it was something that was detrimental to the family. He also wrote that government policy should favor married couples over, and I quote, cohabitators, homosexuals, or fornicators. But that was a long time ago. He was in his 30s. Now Bob McDonnell is in his 40s, and he's mainstream. That kook end stuff, worry not, Virginia. Worry not, America. Bob McDonnell's just a small government, low taxes Constitution lover. He is the Republican resurgence. Except it is not working out that way. Tonight we can report that Governor Bob McDonnell is stepping back from a third radically right-wing policy position that he's taken as governor in response to very negative public reaction. Governor McDonnell keeps trying this stuff over and over and over again. And then it gets national attention and he has to dial it back and pretend he didn't mean it in the first place. It has happened again. Last night we reported on Governor McDonnell's plan to require nonviolent felons to write an essay about their contributions to society since their release if they wanted to have their voting rights restored. What had been a relatively perfunctory process would now include something like a test of a person's literacy about his or her merit as a citizen of Virginia. And another day, that sort of thing might have been called a literacy test. And in another day, literacy tests were used to keep African Americans from voting in the South. This policy change was greeted the way a lot of Governor McDonnell's governing ideas have been greeted so far. Much of the reaction could be described as horrified. And so today, Governor Bob McDonnell went on the radio in Norfolk, Virginia, acting as if his literacy test for voting policy wasn't really what his administration said it would be. And maybe it's not really going to happen anyway.
There's no essay. We've asked for just a simple statement of what the person has done in order to be reintegrated into society, a little bit about their crime, what they've done to get back into society, any community activities, and we're still in the draft stages. And I just ask people to just give us a few months. We haven't even announced the final process.
There's no essay. Still in the draft stages. Give us a few months. We haven't even announced the final process yet. Sounds like it's not even really a done deal yet. Maybe the reporting on this jumped the gun? I don't think so. Governor McDonnell's statement about this just being in the draft stages and not being an essay and give us a few months, we haven't finalized it yet, it's pretty hard to square with this. What you're looking at here is a letter obtained by the Washington Post. It's dated February 26, 2010. It was sent by the Commonwealth of Virginia to a nonviolent felon who was applying for the restoration of his civil rights. The person who received this letter, according to the letter, was being notified of a, quote, new requirement in pursuing the right to vote. Quote, a personal letter addressed to the governor explaining the circumstances of your arrest and conviction. Give a brief description of current employment or a good faith effort to obtain employment. If you have made strides in education or are involved in church activities, please let us know as well. Please also include any and all service to the community since being released by the court and the reasons why you believe the restoration of your civil rights is justified. That letter already went out to people trying to get their voting rights restored in Virginia. But according to Governor McDonnell on the radio today, the policy change that requires that statement, just a draft. Give us a few months. There's been no policy change. We're not asking people to do that. This morning, the Washington Post reported that dozens of nonviolent felons were sent the same letter requiring a letter to the governor as part of their applications for their restoration of civil rights. So this is the third instance of Bob McDonnell governing extremely immoderately and then walking back from those immoderate positions. You'll recall that he revoked hiring protections from gays and lesbians who worked for the Commonwealth of Virginia before he changed his mind and offered a non-binding suggestion that people please not discriminate, even though he was declaring that the law said you could. Thanks for that. More recently, he declared April Confederate History Month in Virginia and failed to mention the institution of slavery in that proclamation. Then he sort of changed his mind and apologized and redeclared Confederate History Month with a recognition that slavery was a bad thing. Appreciate that. And now this. The institution of a de facto literacy test for people seeking to regain their voting rights, followed by this morning's extra flimsy walkback. A walkback that appears to be disproven almost entirely by the evidentiary facts as discovered and reported by the Washington Post. Do you remember Sarah Palin? Remember Bobby Jindal? Meet Bob McDonnell, the latest scorchingly right-wing Republican governor to be tapped by the party as the next rising star, only to encounter very severe turbulence on the way up. Joining us now is Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation magazine. Chris, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you too, Rachel.
We've had Governor McDonnell do something totally right-wing on gay rights, on the issue of slavery, and on the issue of this pseudo-literacy test for voting. And now apparently we've had climb downs from him on all three issues. I feel like that's a recipe for alienating everyone who's not in your base and then alienating your base too. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I definitely agree on the first part of that. I mean, you wonder, it's a question of whether the language, the climb downs are half-hearted enough that even the base understands that he doesn't mean them, so that he's not alienating the base. I mean, what's remarkable about this issue, right? I mean, this is someone who is pursuing a zealous culture war kind of prerogative for no apparent reason of kind of broad political gain. I mean, the guy just got into office. It's not like people are clamoring in the state of Virginia, whatever the political mood, and there is definitely a sort of rising tide of conservatism all across the South. That rising tide of conservatism isn't people, you know, calling up their elected representatives and asking that an extra step be added to felon disenfranchisement. He's pursuing these kind of pet culture war issues, Confederacy memorialization as well, with no apparent political justification other than ideological zealotry or absolute fealty to the most extreme part of his coalition.
Presumably, Governor McDonnell could get these things out of the way early in his term as governor of Virginia and then try to be a more compassionate conservative or less of a culture warrior later in his term. He could then hearken back to these early steps that he took as governor early in his term in a run for national office. Is that possibly the game plan?
I guess so. I mean, look, Virginia is a state whose politics are fascinating, right? Because it has been a red state for so long and went blue for the first time in many elections to vote for Barack Obama, and obviously has gone back. It's had two Democratic governors in a row. The game plan in Virginia, if you're the governor, is that you have to leave office in 4 years, so you got to find another job right away. So the idea is that you either you try to run for Senate or you seek some kind of national office. Obviously, the latter, the incentives are not to be pursuing Confederacy memorialization and literacy tests. So I got to think that he is pegging his future to the most extreme right part of the Virginia voting base, but it doesn't really make a lot of political sense even in that context.
It is, of course, possible that he thinks the whole Governor Rick Perry secession thing is going to work out, and then he and Rick can be co-presidents. No, never mind. Governor McDonnell also said on the radio today that he blames Democrats for the negative attention to the essay/literacy test thing. We don't know who's behind the reporting on this, but does that seem right to you?
So far, I've read one Democratic politician in the state of Virginia comment on this, and the copy in the Washington Post clearly stated when she was prompted and informed of the changes. So this is, I think, pretty clearly being driven by some very fine reporting on the part of the Washington Post, and kudos to them. And look, Virginia is a state in which the median Virginia Democrat doesn't have a ton to gain by making a big stink out of felon re-enfranchisement issues. So I think the idea that this is being driven by Democrats is not particularly plausible.
One last question about the specifics of this in terms of trying to divine what's going on with him politically. He was lauded as such a great campaigner, but he seems to be just blowing every symbolic political issue he tries to run on since he's been elected. The letter that was sent to felons asks people to describe their employment, their education, their community service, and specifically it asks them to describe their church activities. Is that a politically significant part of this?
Well, look, the guy graduated from Pat Roberts' university. I mean, what's frustrating about this is that the writing was on the wall during the campaign. It was always clear that he was attempting to pull off this massive bait and switch. This is someone who comes from the religious right. You know, I mean, that's his world. That's what he's been immersed in. The things that he wrote in that thesis, you know, stand on their own for what he presumably believes in as an adult. And as a matter of law, it seems absurd to me that the religious beliefs of someone should have anything to do with whether their right to vote is reinstated. But clearly this is where he comes from. I don't think this is anything other than who Bob